Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Fagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. The week is speeding by. We are inching closer to New York. And I'm just curious if it's going to be more of like the Jay-Z version of like New York, or if it's going to be more of like the Taylor Swift "Welcome to New York" when we land. I don't know which one I prefer.
I kind of want the I prefer the Jay-Z Alicia Keys version. That I think would be very welcoming. It'd be very grandiose, right?
It's stereotypical as hell. Like, it's cliched as hell, but. Yeah.
Hey man, if you're making the trip, it gotta be worth it.
Exactly. I don't know. The Taylor Swift version does have that like 80s vibe thing to it. So I'm not saying that's what I'll be blasting when I land, but maybe in the cab. I don't know. Well,
just to annoy the driver.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Uber dude, can we do this real quick? I'm sure you never get requests for this ever. So welcome to this episode. We are inching closer to New York. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. We have the game to go over. The Vikings were successful in taking down Arizona, despite ourselves and despite all of the deflected passes. We will definitely get into that. And there's a major injury that we are going to need to talk about as well. After that, we'll probably talk about we'll check in on some former quarterbacks of the Vikings and see how well their season is going, and then hit the mailbag. But before that, again, just want to thank you guys so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. And if you find yourself in the greater New York area and would like to visit a live taping of Norse Code, you can go to Bar None on Thursday, October 18th, later this week. We will be there about 9 o'clock. About 9 o'clock time over there, so I suppose 9 o'clock Eastern, since that's the time zone and all. But again, Island of Manhattan, Bar None in New York City, Thursday, October 18th at 9 p.m. We'll be hanging out there. We will be talking football. We will be doing a live show. We'll also be taking questions from you guys as well. So come check us out. We'll have some free swag for you as well. So we are definitely looking forward to that. If you would like to support Norse Code, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, and that's more of a subscription-based way of doing it. You can do like $1 a month, tree fitty to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, anything you'd like. Or you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code as well. And Arif, I was actually thinking about this earlier. So we do the Christmas special every year, and for those who are uninitiated, we tend to do the Christmas special full of like our best of and outtakes and all that. And we want to give you guys something special for Christmas. So in addition to the regular episode, those who are subscribed to our Patreon, giving at least $1 a month, will also receive a extra Christmas episode. So we will be tossing that on as well. So there'll be 2 outtake shows this year as a result. So if you would like in on this, you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code and you can donate there. You just need to be an active donor as of December 1st to get the show. So again, thank you guys so much. We really do appreciate it and thought this would be kind of nice. So if you're interested, just go ahead and go to patreon.com/Norse Code before December 1st. Get into the episode, and the big news today was that the worst fears were officially confirmed. Mike Hughes, stud cornerback, has a torn ACL. Before we talk about how this affects the team, I want to talk to you, Arif. How does this negatively affect your brand as you were planning on just kind of riding Mike Hughes' success all the way to his probable defensive rookie player of the year?
Right. Honestly, from just the perspective of my brand, this might be a positive, right? Because I could just say, well, he would have been, right? And I don't have, like, no one can fact check. Like, you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's so.
This isn't Arif's mind blowers or anything. No, this is fine.
Yeah. So honestly, like this positions my brand in a pretty solid place. Obviously, he didn't start the season off that well, but here's the secret: last year's defensive rookie of the year, Marshawn Lattimore, first 4 weeks were pretty bad. So this I think this could kind of work in my favor. So obviously he's not going to win it, so I can't confirm it, right? Which would have been just a great hit for my brand. But I don't think I'll ever be at a point where, I can necessarily regret having that take, just from the perspective of the brand. Obviously, you don't want to see a player get hurt for like arbitrary clout. But if we're just isolating the question, this is probably more helpful than I guess hurtful is maybe the wrong word to use here. But I was thinking about that as I said the sentence.
Like,
more helpful than not. Let's say that.
There we go. Hurtful is definitely the wrong word for it. So let's talk Vikings, and let's talk the Mike Hughes injury. This was obviously a big blow to a cornerback situation that was not ideal to open up the season. If it was ideal, he wouldn't have been playing to begin with right now, or he would just be starting to play right now. So this is obviously a big thing. Where do the Vikings stand, and who is going to be taking his place out there?
So I'm gonna have to double check this against the snap counts for this specific game. But Mackenzie Alexander had been taking fewer and fewer snaps. Obviously, in the Rams game, he took more snaps than he did against the Eagles, just because of the personnel situation. But I do think that this does create problems, because I think the Vikings were on their way to transitioning from Mackenzie Alexander to Mike Hughes. Luckily, Alexander had a really excellent game, actually, so that helps. They were given options. They were playing with those options. And while that didn't quite work out in the first couple of weeks, it certainly looked like it was in the direction of working out, right? Like, I think Mike Hughes was playing a lot better. Mac obviously was playing a lot better. And you had a great nickel situation where you could go in a nickel and you could put George Aloka or Jaron Curse or Mackenzie Alexander or Mike Hughes, just whoever you thought best fit the matchup that you were getting. Mackenzie Alexander against Larry Fitzgerald was a matchup that they kind of wanted because, Mike Hughes would be a rookie up against like the craftiest vet in the NFL. And Mac, I think, might be a little bit bigger. I'm not confident about that, but certainly I think plays a little bit more physically when he's confident. And that's something you need against Fitzgerald. But if they move J.J. Nelson in the slot, maybe you want Mike Hughes in there instead, right? So it diminishes their options. Obviously, it diminishes their depth, too, because if Trey Waynes gets hurt and they move Mackenzie Alexander to the outside, they previously would have put Mike Hughes on the outside. That's what they did when Waynes or Rhodes were injured. And we know over the past 2 years that Rhodes and Waynes are not necessarily the healthiest quarterbacks in the NFL. And so you might be prone to see bouts where they're missing snaps, or at least historically that's what happened. And so having Mike Hughes out there would have been nice. And now you kind of have to put, maybe Mac out there and, Sherrill's in the slot, or Holton Hill in the slot, or maybe you put Holton Hill on the outside. And that's somebody that they're a lot less confident in. And so that's kind of a question that they have to answer. And so that's going to hurt their depth there. And maybe they want to put Jaron Curse in the slot a little bit more often based on the matchup. So it sucks from that perspective. If the Vikings were going to get injured anywhere, this is like a better place than like Stephen Weatherly, for example, was out for a couple of snaps. And it was like, oh, well, they're down to Jalen Holmes, a defensive tackle, to play defensive end. That really sucks. They don't have any. If Jalen Holmes goes down or Daniil Hunter goes down, that's it. You don't have any more defensive ends. You're going to have to play Anthony Barr or something. So, it's better to have an injury at cornerback than maybe any other position on the Vikings. So if you were picking and choosing, I guess that's where you'd go, so they can weather the storm. But it sucks in a lot of ways, for like in the obvious ways, and then also kind of like in the strategic ways too.
And it looked like Curse was kind of picking up the majority of the snaps once Hughes went down, right?
It seemed like we did see a lot of Mackenzie Alexander snaps, but yeah, they were rotating with Curse and Alexander. I really do think that they have settled into a pattern where if it's a tight end on the field, they definitely want Curse out there. And if it's a receiver, kind of depending on the receiver that they expect to go into the nickel, they'll put Mac in there, at least, with Hughes out. So, yeah, I think we did see a fair amount of Jaron Curse on the field as a result. But I also do think, and that increased as a result of Hughes, but we did see Mackenzie Alexander kind of later in the game. So I don't think that they completely wanted to supplant Alexander for Curse, especially because they have such distinct skill sets from each other.
Yeah. So let's get into the game. Obviously, this isn't a great injury to happen for any player, but the Vikings are going to move on, and the Vikings did win the game against the Arizona Cardinals. It started out a little bit of a struggle to kind of get some footing, and then once the Vikings started going, they really started going, and the defense showed up, and the running game showed up. I guess what was the bigger surprise, the difficulty in starting, or the fact that the run game was actually worth half a damn this game?
I guess the run game was a bit more of a surprise because I think kind of getting your engine going is kind of like a normal thing in the NFL. And a lot of teams, it takes them a while to kind of get into rhythm and get going, defensively or offensively. And the fact that scripted plays are now featured in almost every NFL offense, the beginning of the game can often look very different from the middle or the end of the game. So that's not hugely surprising. Although, against a team like the Cardinals, you do want to show up big and early because they're just not a good team, and so you kind of want to establish yourself as a team that should be able to beat them pretty easily. They do end up doing that in the end, of course, but it would have been nice to see it earlier. As for the running game, I'm surprised for a couple of reasons. I think the first is that you did have an offensive lineman go down before the game, and so you had Rashad Hill at left tackle and Brian O'Neill, who is not supposed to be known for his run blocking prowess, in at right tackle. The run game was supposed to actually be a weakness for him kind of coming out because he doesn't have as much play strength as a bunch of tackles because he's supposed to be more of an athlete than he is a technician. And I think contrary to a lot of people's beliefs, there's a really good argument that run blocking requires more technical proficiency than pass protection does. So there were a couple of reasons to think that the run game wouldn't get going. Plus, obviously, they were 31st in the NFL in rush yards per game, 30th, I think, in yards per carry, like all sorts of reasons to think that the run game wasn't going to be there. And then another set of additional reasons that it wasn't going to show up. You didn't have your starting running back. He wasn't healthy. So you have Latavius Murray in there, who is, more than I think fulfilled kind of his end of the bargain with regards to establishing that the Vikings can run the ball. But yeah, those are all reasons that it's surprising that it showed up. And then also, the Vikings haven't really been, aside from San Francisco, which feels like ages ago, they haven't really been in games where they have an opportunity to showcase the running game because they've been just playing catch up, or they've been playing some kind of urgent football, right? Like against the Packers or something like that, or, against the Rams. So they haven't been in a situation where they felt probably comfortable running the ball. So there are all sorts of reasons. I didn't expect them necessarily to come out and dominate the Cardinals, despite the fact that they were 10-point favorites by the spread. And so for them to be able to do that and then also run the ball really effectively, 6.6 yards per carry, I think. That's all, really, really great stuff to see. It does help that Arizona entering the game had the 31st ranked run defense by a lot of measures. I think yards per game, yards per carry, success rate allowed, stuff like that. So that helped.
All we needed to do was just play a team that was worse than us, and for as far as our run game versus their run defense, and all of a sudden we have a run game. It's awesome. Can we do this next week?
Yeah, why not? I should ask the Jets about their run defense. We'll find out. It's probably a lot better. But I would say that played a really big role. I don't want to undersell the Vikings having an offensive line that has the ability to run block up front. I thought Pat Elflein did a really good job. Brian O'Neill did an incredible job as a run blocker. But it's pretty clear that the Cardinals run defense was just not there that game. Obviously, when you see multiple angry stiff arms in a game from Latavius Murray to some poor unsuspecting safety, that's just that's not a symptom of the run defense. That's just that sucks for that player. But overall, there were a lot of holes, I think, in the Cardinals run game. They had attacked the wrong gaps. They were easily done in by, I think, really kind of basic forms of deception. And they just weren't kind of setting themselves. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm kind of surprised to see from another team, just because I've been so used to watching teams at least execute kind of the basic parts of their assignment, that seeing the Cardinals kind of blow themselves out of the gaps was really surprising. And that, I think, plays a really big role in why the Vikings got nearly 200 yards on the ground.
This seemed like it seemed like the Cardinals were simply outcoached as far as the run game went. Like, they weren't anywhere where the Vikings were planning, or they were just being pushed around easily.
Yeah, it does seem like that, which is so unusual to me. And, I don't have, coaching experience or anything like that, so I could definitely be wrong. But my intuition is that it is much harder to be outcoached in the run game. Not that, like, it's easy to, like, super get outcoached or to super outcoach someone in the passing game or anything like that. But I think there's like a wider variance on how coaching mistakes can impact the passing game, because there's only so much to key in the running game, especially a running game as standard really as the Vikings, which is not like an insult or anything like that. I think some complex running games fall apart. But for the Vikings, it's a pretty standard running game. There's a lot of zone blocking. They'll pull a center, which is kind of unusual, but they have shown that they're willing to do that on film time and time again. They pull Tom Compton a lot. Everyone kind of knows that at this point, or they should. And even with Brian O'Neill in there, they're not going to really change a lot of what they do from the run game. But at the same time, when you run a couple of outside zones and then you run an inside zone to kind of change things up and attack kind of an overreaching nose tackle or something like that, that's like kind of discipline. That's kind of out coaching, but honestly, it shouldn't happen nearly as often as it did for the Vikings, who were totally willing to run off tackle to the right or the left, often to the right, and then attack the middle. But like, that's like really normal stuff. Like, I don't know why they didn't see it coming, especially because sometimes those inside zones, they're not pulling people. They're not forcing Rashad Hill to reach across and try to cut off Corey Peters and cut the backside or anything like that on a pull. But like their inside runs sometimes looked a lot different than their outside runs, and the Cardinals were still flowing to the sideline and letting themselves get cut on the get got on the cut back. So yeah, it does seem like they were outcoached or something. I don't know. They didn't teach their linemen to read keys. Like, I don't know. That seems like a weird thing to say, because like teaching linemen to read keys, happens in college and very often in high school. So saying like this NFL coach didn't teach like Corey Peters, who's been like on multiple NFL teams, not to read keys, seems like a weird thing to say, but they definitely were too aggressive at times.
Yeah, it was Blake, our guest on Thursday's show, previewing the Cardinals game, had basically said that their coaches were trash. Like he was really confused as to how they could have this amount of talent and have no idea where anybody was going. So
So here's a secret, not a secret. Here's a tidbit. I'm in a wins pool where you just pick 3 teams, and whoever has the most wins at the end of the year wins the pool. And it's a draft, and because of the weird distribution of wins in the NFL, it's not a snake draft. It's Bill Simmons came up with it, and it's actually one of his few good ideas. But my 3rd round pick, obviously all the good teams were gone, all the average teams were gone, and so I had to pick an underdog team with the ability to surprise. I actually picked the Cardinals, right? Because I was like, Sam Bradford was really good for the Vikings. If he's healthy, he should be fine for however many games he's fine for, and then Josh Rosen will be ready to play, and he's good, right? Obviously, I'm concerned about their offensive line, but it's a 3rd round pick. I'm picking between like them and the Raiders, right? And the defense should be much better than it was last year because they've got all this talent. Sure, they don't have Tyrann Mathieu, but they've got Patrick Peterson. They've got Budda Baker, who's a really great both special teamer and defender last year. They've got a decent defensive line. Robert Kimdiche is finally coming into his own. I'm excited. I'm going to pick them to be in my wins pool. Never mind. So yeah, that defense is just not doing it for me.
No. Although the Oakland pick wouldn't have exactly been much better. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I was picking between a couple of teams. I just used Oakland as an example to tell people I had a pretty bare cover.
This is the level of talent you were scouting at that particular moment.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Next up, we can talk about Kirk Cousins. He was very effective, but the passes were getting knocked down far more than they should have. I believe the total was either 6 or 7.
I think it kind of depends on what you count as a batted pass, because I think some people had 6 and some people had 7, and I forget. I think there was one that people didn't count. It might be because Cousins completed a pass to himself on a batted pass, and some people are not counting that.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because PFF now has a grade for the.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's amazing. So Robert Kimdiche has now been credited with allowing one reception with 6 yards of after catch work, because Kirk Cousins completed a pass to himself, and Kimdiche is the closest defender and therefore was assigned Kirk Cousins in coverage. To PFF's credit, this still goes down as a negative 1 yard reception. So that's in favor of Kimdiche. B, they gave him a 0.0 because what can you honestly expect?
Yeah.
So they didn't really ding him or praise him. They were just yeah, well, I guess it's him. So there you go.
I enjoyed that. I enjoyed hearing that was going on. This is going on your permanent record.
Right, exactly.
So what's with the batted passes at the line?
Yeah. So, I asked Zimmer about that after the game in his presser. And he didn't seem to have an answer right there. He probably wants to evaluate it later. He threw out a theory that, does account for some of them. He mentioned that they run a lot of naked bootlegs. And so a naked bootleg is just a play action pass where all of your offensive linemen are flowing as if they were blocking, say, an outside zone. And so because of that, the backside is not protected. Very often it's not on the outside zone because you kind of just want your running back. You trust him to beat the defensive end at the point of attack. And as a result, because it's play action, the quarterback has the ball and he's kind of open in the field without protection, which is why it's called a naked bootleg. If the defensive linemen aren't biting on the run action, that you've got your quarterback and he's just going to get hit. So the quarterback has to get rid of the ball quickly. The defensive lineman knows that, so they pull up and jump and they hit the ball. That accounts for one, maybe two, possibly three, if my memory is just foggy right now, of the 7 batted passes. And so it's not a good explanation. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was just a combination of really great scouting from the Cardinals defensive linemen, because I don't want to give their coaches that much credit based off of what we've seen, and some really bad luck from Kirk Cousins. So I think on those naked bootlegs, for example, I don't think there's much Cousins could do. And the pass deflection that occurred, further down the field, that's just him trying to fit a window, and it didn't quite work. That's not really a batted pass, and I don't think a lot of people counted that. So yeah, that's just stuff that happens. But my guess as to, and I can't confirm this, my guess is that he has a tell. He doesn't have the fastest release. He's certainly not the slowest. He's not Tebow or Byron Leftwich or anything like that. He doesn't have a long looping release, but he's also not Phillip Rivers, right? He doesn't have or Jimmy Garoppolo. He doesn't have the fastest release in the NFL either, which means that there is some lead time that if you have a tell, defensive linemen know that they can put their hands up and jump in the air and really interfere with your pass or your passing lane. And because his release time it seems standard, maybe a little bit faster than average, but because his release time is not super insanely fast, that gives them time to react to the tell and to the throw, and then the ball comes out and they have the ability to bat it down. Because it didn't look like, based off of what I saw, he was throwing the ball all that low, right? And one of the most frustrating things has to be Cousins saw an instance where his pass would be batted, pulls the ball back, a defensive lineman jumps and then mistimes his jump, right? Because the ball has been pulled back, and he throws through a different window and it gets batted at the line of scrimmage by a different defensive lineman. That's just, I don't know what you can do, man. That sucks.
That's just bad luck at that point.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So he was aware, I can't do that. It's going to get batted down. And he pulls it. And you can't win, buddy. Which, I mean, you can. You won in a pretty big way. You won by 10 points. But geez, that sucks. So I think it's not that he's throwing the ball too low, which was a legitimate concern, I think, about Matt Castle when he was getting his passes batted at the line of scrimmage. Or that his release time was maybe too long. I think it's a combination of a tell and a release time. Whatever issue was causing Teddy Bridgewater's passes to be batted. I think for the 1 year he had a batted pass issue. I don't think it's related to those, and I especially don't think it's related to Castles. I think he probably just has a tell of some sort. A lot of quarterbacks, it's patting the ball. That might be Cousins' tell. But sometimes it's something else. Like it might be just kind of the way that he sets his feet or the way that he, chokes up in his stance as he's about to throw or something like that.
Entirely possible. Also worth noting that we had multiple touchdowns by way of rushing, including Kirk Cousins, who then proceeded to look incredibly lame.
Yeah, this is all entirely Adam Thielen's fault.
So we actually do have someone to point the finger of blame on.
Yeah, based off of the post-game interviews, which, this definitely came up multiple times. This is all Adam Thielen's fault. So Adam Thielen says that at Mankato State, they had this touchdown celebration called the dead arm dance, which should clarify. So some people were like, Arif, that's the Bernie. It's obviously not the Bernie. Well, Cousins did the Bernie to his credit, but no one else was doing the Bernie because it's an unspecified dance. Like that's exactly that. And Thielen even told the other teammates, I think Remmers ended up recounting this, told the other teammates, do whatever you want. Just make sure your arms are dead and swinging. Like, okay. So that led to a lot of different interpretations, which could be fun, but actually just looked abysmal. And it looked like there's like fun, chaotic, or like fun, no one knows what they're doing. This didn't look like that. It was just like really lame. There's no other way to put, like, you had it correct at the beginning. It's just lame. So what? I can't believe we have stories behind this. We have multiple interviews.
This dance enough is enough to keep any player from Mankato from joining an NFL team for at least 3 years.
Yeah, it puts shame to the Minnesota State University Mankato football team. Mm-hmm. It puts shame, I think, to the Vikings. Unfortunately,
yeah. Okay,
might affect the Vikings' recruitment efforts in next offseason. Honestly, that's pretty tough. Especially coming off of such a great season of touchdown celebrations.
I think that's the thing that is kind of that let people down. Is just, last season we were number 1 or number 2 on the for the entire
probably
league.
Number 2 Philly. That might have been the difference in the NFC Championship game. Mm-hmm. Might have been Philly's just incredible touchdown celebrations.
It might have been. I mean, Adam Thielen did have that fantastic the sliding goal like on his knees, like that was awesome.
Yeah, that one's perfect.
But because you're a Minnesota player, you should definitely take care of your knees at that point. Like, yeah.
Right. I mean, the duck gray duck, the sliding goal. I mean, like all of them were great. But what is this? And also like. So I saw the Chiefs and also the Cardinals did this too. The posing together for a group photo, it's kind of boring, but it's not bad. And I think that's where you enter. Like if you're trying to be creative, you can get pretty bad. And this was that. I tweeted out, and I stand by it, that after reviewing the film, this might be the worst touchdown celebration in the history of the NFL. So it's tough to say, but I mean, remember in, 2014, the Vikings had the worst running game in the NFL. You have to say it in order for it to be fixed. So I think the rest of the team kind of knows. They're just giving Thielen, he's a locker room leader. He's setting these records. He has a right to maybe request for one game. They do his celebration. Fine, they did his celebration. But now it's literally anyone else's turn.
It's CJ Ham's turns this time.
Ham can coordinate it. Diggs can coordinate. I'm sure that would turn out great. Even Cousins. It's going to be some lame, nerdy, dorky stuff, but at least it'll be fun, right? Like the potato sack race that the Chiefs did last year. I think it was the Chiefs. That was fun and dorky. So yeah, that's. If you watched, one last thing. If you don't watch it again. And you just watch the individual players, it gets worse every single time. Like Treadwell clearly has no idea what he's doing. Rudolph isn't really like doing the same thing. He's like walking up with swagger, which is not a dead arm thing, but it looks weird too because he's just like walking to the group. Cousins does the Bernie, which is better, and Diggs makes it look cool somehow because he's Diggs, I guess. Conklin has no idea what he's doing. Remmers, what? I have no idea. So, yeah, we'll put it in the show notes because obviously this took up a substantial portion of our recap of the game, as it should. So we'll put the video in the notes.
Yep, this is why anybody comes to Norse Code, so we can break down the touchdown dances. This is the hard-hitting journalism you expect for your Patreon dollars, which you can give to us at patreon.com/NorseCode. So obviously Adam Thielen is still a stud. He had another one of those coming out parties, but now the coming out is the discussion as to whether or not Adam Thielen is in fact the best receiver in the league. We had talked briefly about whether or not the Diggs and Thielen combo is the best in the league and which one was the better receiver, but the league has now taken notice and Adam Thielen looked unstoppable out there.
He did. Sixth consecutive 100-yard game. I think, he is obviously he's on pace, but he could potentially beat a consecutive yards from scrimmage record, which interestingly enough is held, I think, by Kareem Hunt. Which means no matter what happens, Hunt is going to retain the record for a rookie, right? The rookie record version of it. But yeah, I think he has to do it. Well, I think one more game, and I think he's tied for the yards from scrimmage record.
Correct.
I might have to double check everything, but yeah, that's pretty incredible. People are beginning to rank Thielen in the top 5. Again, I love Thielen. He's a phenomenal receiver. It's difficult for me to say he's better than Odell Beckham. It's difficult for me to say that he's better than, even Michael Thomas, but, Julio and Antonio and so on. And I bet AJ Green is also better still, even though he's not producing, I think, in the same way. It's crowded at the top. And whatever the order is, Diggs and Thielen are very close and certainly in the top 10. They're both very, very close to the top 5. But yeah, the league is taking notice because he's leading the league in yards. He's been doing it for an insane amount of time. He's leading the league in targets. He's leading the league in receptions. He's finally getting touchdowns, right? Because last year he got, I think, 3 touchdowns or something like that. So he's kind of regressing back to the yards touchdown ratio. What's interesting is Adam Harstad is a fantasy football guy, analytics kind of guy that I follow on Twitter, who's like, I like following him because he's like very introspective, even though he makes like a bunch of bad jokes, which, yeah, that's a lot of people's Twitter. So, but he's very kind of like the Socratic, like evaluate your priors or assumptions kind of stuff. But he talked about yards to touchdown ratio and how it tends to rubber band back for high level players. And so interestingly, it's about 100 yards to a touchdown. So if you're below that, there's a really good chance that you'll get back up to 100 yards a touchdown. Or if you're above that, you'll sink back down to 100 yards a touchdown. So if you're like 54 yards or something like that to a touchdown, which is what Gronkowski used to be, you're scoring a lot of touchdowns. You're not getting a bunch of yards. You're obviously a very elite player. But over time, you'll end up losing pace, and Gronk is now at like 150 yards per touchdown. He's still an elite player. But a career, that's 97 for him. And I think it's kind of the same thing that might be happening to Thielen, where he had a bunch of yards, not a bunch of touchdowns, and now it's kind of coming back where his yards and touchdowns kind of equal each other. So he's doing everything now in terms of what a receiver does from an on-field production standpoint. He's also running every route. So he's difficult to like defend from the perspective of force him to do what he's bad at, because he's not like bad at anything. I was
gonna say he doesn't really have any glaring holes, and we talked briefly about that last week. There was the sideline throw that almost looked like a throwaway there from Cousins, and the one where his shoulder almost looked like it was going out, and like the moment that it touched Thielen, I didn't even need to like question whether or not it was caught. That was caught. That was going to be in. That was good because it's Thielen, and Thielen is catching everything his way.
Yeah, both of them are such reliable receivers. And normally when we talk about reliable receivers, we're talking about like, you got a possession receiver as your wide receiver 2 or whatever. You look for him on third down. He's your Jarius Wright, right? But no, I mean, they're big play receivers who are reliable, and that puts you just in the top tier. And what's great about, let's say we're having this conversation about the top 5 receivers in the NFL. If instead of top 5, we talked about tiers, the advantage that Julio and Antonio and possibly Odell have had over, and you could throw in AJ Green, DeAndre Hopkins, have had over the second tier, I think is diminished. And maybe, even if you don't rank them in the same spot, you would put, Diggs and Thielen and Michael Thomas in the same tier as all of those. And because he has that combination of explosive, big play kind of guy that's also just reliable. They both have incredible sideline awareness. They both have incredible body control. They both have do a fantastic job tracking the ball in the air, whether it's a deep pass, a short pass, whatever. They've got great catch radii, I guess. They both kind of contort to the ball really well and can kind of erase inaccuracy, which we saw a lot last year. We don't have to see as much this year, which is great because it generates more yards after the catch. That combination of reliability and the ability to make big plays leads to incredible highlights, like the ability of Thielen to get his knee down before he kind of slides the rest of it out of bounds or anything like that, or Diggs's toe tap at the side, which was just incredible. That might have been the most impressive individual catch of the game, where Diggs there's like maybe a couple of molecules of grass between Diggs's toes and the sideline. He catches it. It's just, it's difficult to describe some of these incredible catches that the two of them have the ability to pull off that honestly most receivers in the NFL can't even hope of, to do.
No, exactly. And, the real discussion as to whether or not he's the top receiver on your team is whether or not the top cornerback from the other team is going to be shadowing him the whole time. And the moment that happens, you have Diggs floating out there with the most hated person on your team, the second tier cornerback. Yeah. As
Bomani Jones classic. Yeah, the most hated person on your team.
Because you know what's going to happen when the number 1 cornerback goes down? You got the number 2 cornerback.
Oh, you're Calvin Johnson.
I know we must have referenced that video specifically at least 20 times on episodes of Norse Code. It is still one of the finest bits ever put out on YouTube by anyone. The Bomani Jones most hated people on an NFL team. But yeah, right around the time that they start attacking Thielen with the number 1 corner, you're leaving Diggs wide open. Doesn't matter who's on him, he's wide open.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And part of me thinks that the way the Vikings have been using Diggs, at least in the first 5 weeks, kind of less so in this last week against the Cardinals, feels like they kind of bottled him up to kind of unleash him later. Maybe that's wishful thinking on my part, because there's a lot of like short passing kind of Percy Harvin-ish type stuff that he's like good at, but I don't think is like the most efficient use of his resources. In this game, he ended up seeing a ton of Patrick Peterson, I think more of Peterson than Thielen did. And Thielen didn't get targeted on, I think, the 30% of snaps that Peterson was on someone not named Stephon Diggs. But I think they're scared about the kind of potential that Diggs can bring. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean, so I know at Sexy Prince, Yinka, friend of the show, I'm sure we've had him on the show, friend of the show, Yinka Ayinde said that means Diggs is the wide receiver 1. It is suggestive of that, but it could also just be suggestive of the fact that when Thielen beats you, very often, given the route that they have him running, it's like for 20 yards. Now, that's obviously not the case. He had like an amazing series of deep touchdowns over the course of this season alone, including like a 68-yarder. But which one more yard would have been nice. Which it means that he's a big play threat. But it could just be that if Diggs gets open, he's leaving, right? So it just could be that they're scared of what happens when Diggs gets open more than they're scared of what happens when Thielen gets open. And, hey, maybe Yinka consider This could potentially be maybe just a little bit of bias. Let's call it racism. On the part of on the part of the people maybe game planning this, where they don't give, when you've got two receivers of potentially equal capability, they don't give Thielen the credit, and they're putting the wide receiver one or the cornerback one on Diggs. The thing is, you can check in Pro Football Focus, one of the tools that they don't advertise that often is something called the shadow coverage matrix, which is just the coolest name for a pretty normal tool. But you can check to see which corners had shadow coverage essentially over a receiver and followed him around and stuff like that. And while they don't actually have Patrick Peterson on Stephon Diggs in that thing, they also confirmed in a tweet that it was Patrick Peterson following Diggs around for most of the game. I think it might be 75% might be the cutoff. Whatever, they tell you what the cutoff is when you click on it for truly shadow coverage. And you can see the Vikings haven't been the subject of real shadow coverage at any point in the past 6 weeks, which means that whoever the top receiver is, maybe he is spending the majority of his time on Stephon Diggs, but he's certainly not spending at least 75% of the time. So there's not really confirmation that Diggs is the best receiver of the two based off of what opposing defensive coordinators are doing. And remember, opposing defensive coordinators still shadowed Sammy Watkins in LA last year. And so it's not a pure indication of wide receiver one. It can be an indication of a lot of things. But I do think it is suggestive of that. And I do think that when you get to that point, when cornerbacks start trailing Thielen around, Diggs is just going to have a field day. And Thielen's streak might be broken.
Yeah. Also, shadow coverage is the name of my favorite X-Men villain. I think he hangs around with Mr. Sinister, possibly. Let's talk the defense real quick. Defense did very well. They did end up allowing a touchdown after a couple of not so great penalties, including one to Trey Waynes. But I thought the defense played very well, and we did get that interception on Josh Rosen that we were expecting.
Yeah, it was great. I thought. So one of the things that stood out to me in a couple of the sacks that showed up, the Harrison Smith sack is a decent example of this. The first Danielle Hunter sack, I want to say, is a great example of this. But there was a bunch of really great blitz design from the Vikings that just really caught the Cardinals unawares, and Josh Rosen in particular, that I think also deserve credit. I mean, Zimmer seems to take a bunch of blame for when the defense does poorly. And in, for example, the Philadelphia Eagles game, I don't know that he was schematically doing stuff that was entirely like his fault that it was exploited. Now, obviously, like if they scout you better than you self-scout, that's on you, but it's not as if he made these big mistakes. I think there's a lot of individual execution errors on that defense. Here, I think it's also important to recognize that when Zimmer does stuff that schemes really well, that he deserves to be recognized for it. And I think they did a lot of that on the sacks that they got of Josh Rosen. I think Mack got a sack, right? Mackenzie Alexander, but also Harrison Smith and Danielle Hunter got two. And I think a lot of those were a product of design. And he's been doing a really good job over the past 2 weeks creating that design. Now, individually, I think a lot of the defensive players did well. Mackenzie Alexander has that great pass deflection of Larry Fitzgerald. Fitz did say that he kind of lost the ball in the lights on that one, but it hit his hands, and Mackenzie Alexander batted it out, and he deserves credit for that. Trey Waynes played pretty well. Xavier Rhodes was shadowing Chad Williams, of all people, which, okay, I guess it worked, right? Like, so Chad Williams entering the game was averaging 10.6 yards per attempt, or yards per game, 10.6. And he only started the last three. He didn't even start the first two. And so they shadowed him, and Rhodes cut his receiving yards in half. He only had 5. And it was like to start the game, he had 5. And then he just was quiet for the rest of the game. So I guess credit to Rhodes for that.
Let's count that as a success.
Yeah. Cool. It's just so weird. But yeah, that's great. Harrison Smith had a pretty good game. He also, I don't want to say he had a great game because he also made some pretty significant errors in coverage. There was twice when he had great positioning. and couldn't turn that into a pass deflection or anything like that, and a play was completed on him. So of all of the fantastically performing defenders, Sheldon Richardson was really great against the run in this game. Linval Joseph was great against the run in the pass. Stephen Weatherly, I thought, did a really good job overall. Anthony Barr played fantastically and stuff like that. So among all of these stellar players, Harrison Smith played like possibly, the least good, but he played really well. It's just, he made these mistakes that I guess the other ones kind of didn't. So, yeah. And also Kendricks got taken in coverage a couple of times, but he overall had a really good game. And the Vikings had like 22 run stops, 22 runs. That's insane in the game. Like, and stops are not tackles. They're tackles that constitute a loss for the opposing offense. So if you don't get 40% of the yardage required to convert on first down, 60% on second down, 100% on third down, those are all stops. And the Vikings consistently put the Cardinals behind the chains, even when they were trying to generate, and David Johnson's a really good running back, even when they were trying to generate some reliability, consistency, and manageable third downs for Josh Rosen. I think, the Cardinals like 0 for 10 on third down? A lot of that has to do with how excellent they were preventing them from getting into manageable situations on first and second.
Definitely, as much as the whole, like, we had a running game and it seemed like they were out schemed, this really did feel like we were out coaching them by miles. Whatever is going on with their offensive coordinator, he needs to be shot into the sun. Like, there's no reason why he should have been outcoached this badly there. That said, they were a little successful through the air, and they were able to pick apart a little bit. There were a couple of dumb penalties along the way as well. I believe Trey Waynes was the one that was caught for PI, and then that wonderful pass right into the middle of the defender's jersey. Like, you couldn't have turned around there, bud.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. There were moments where the coverage wasn't pristine, let's say. But yeah. Mackenzie Alexander was targeted 10 times, which is usually pretty bad. But he only really gave up, 2 bad receptions, one to Jermaine Gresham, one to Christian Kirk. And I believe the Christian Kirk one, that one it's a difficult one of them was difficult to assign to him. So, he ends up giving, kind of 2 long range receptions in kind of low leverage situations that weren't great, but he did a really great job against Larry Fitzgerald. The other stop that he had of Kirk was really good. He ended up in David Johnson's assignment a couple of times and did a really great job against him. So, he had a great game. Obviously, Rhodes, held his opponents, very often Chad Williams down. I think he allowed 23 total yards in the game.
Who are you
really
to doubt the talent and the amazing abilities of that particular gentleman? He can go, that receiver.
Luke and I were actually really big fans of him coming out of the draft because we saw him at the Senior Bowl. He comes from Grambling State, and he was really good in Senior Bowl practices in the game. We actually both thought it'd be really cool if the Vikings drafted him. So he's a guy that I'm a fan of, but he's also like not wide receiver 1. Like, he just isn't. Like, he's like, he could develop into a really good wide receiver 3 with deep speed potential. So I don't want to like crap on him too much, but
who are you to doubt El Dandy there? He's fantastic.
Yeah, I thought Waynes had a good game. Anthony Harris had a phenomenal game. Obviously, he's an interception that helps, but overall, he had a really phenomenal game. Mike Hughes, when he was out there, when he was healthy, had a good game. Georgia Loca, just really great stuff from the defensive backs, kind of all around. And it's weird to say that Harrison Smith is the one that probably gave up the most in terms of like baffling plays and stuff like that.
I suppose we should also mention that Dan Bailey is still a Viking. He was successful in all of his kicks.
We didn't talk about the kicker. That's a huge win for the kicker.
Yeah, we don't have to bring on a kicking specialist yet.
Right. Yet. He actually, I think one of them was really close too, but
yes.
Don't got to worry about it. It was in, it's in. I mean, like going forward, like that's probably really predictive, but like it's in, we're fine.
We can move on knowing that we have a kicker who is good every other game. I'll take that right now, actually. So that's gonna be it for the game. Is there anything that we should mention before we move on?
Man, I just really want to emphasize that defensive line performance was just really stellar. And personally, I feel vindicated about Anthony Barr. I don't know. But
this is good for the hashtag brand.
Yeah, this is really great for the brand. Obviously, it's like not going to, quote unquote, count until he puts together a couple of games. But like, yeah, man, Anthony Barr's not bad. Come on, guys.
All right, let's move on to what I've been looking forward to the most so far this episode. Let's do a recap of former quarterbacks of the Vikings. Now, you may remember us doing this this during the Week 1 game preview, where we were talking about where everyone had landed and their situations. Let's take a look and see how everyone else is doing. Sam Bradford did not play. I think he was a healthy scratch. For the Cardinals.
So he's inactive because it costs $300,000 or $312,000 per game for the Cardinals to activate him. So if Rosen gets injured, Sam Bradford's going to be the one that plays in the next game. But if it's during the game, it's going to be Mike Glennon. So,
well, and as I said last episode, you know what you're getting with Mike Glennon. Which is why Sam Bradford ends up playing. Let's go to the other former Vikings quarterback who is playing in the league right now. Case Keenum. It turns out, as Norse Code listeners can attest to, all that talk last year from Arif and I about how Thielen, yes, Diggs and Thielen were saving his butt all the time and making all these like miraculous catches 5, 10, 15 feet up in the air. Like all of this stuff where he was being bailed out on in Minnesota, he is not having the same success in Denver. And when he was taken out as for a possible concussion, the crowd cheered for his replacement.
Yeah, that's rough. Especially because it's like, dude, he might be concussed. Man, like, what are you doing? But yeah, they were all, well, especially because Chad Kelly has already developed like a bunch of fans and stuff like that. But like Jim Kelly's son, right? Or grandson? Son? Relation.
I'm not checking this. We're keeping this part in.
Yeah, progeny. But he's he was supposed to, he's like supposed to be the next quarterback. Gets in trouble, goes to EMCC, is on Netflix for half a second because the season was actually the one after the one he was at. Goes to Ole Miss. Threatens to like shoot a crowd full of whatever stuff that's like really endearing, right? And he ends up getting. I think is he Mr. Irrelevant? He might have been Mr. Irrelevant. And yeah, he's got like a decent arm. He's developed a following in Denver, and so people were cheering for him. And then plus, Case Keenum has been playing really poorly.
Dusty's been developing a following in Denver. It doesn't mean it's a good idea.
I didn't say it was a good idea.
Okay.
Throwing it at that like Keenum has been playing poorly enough that people are turning their eyes elseward very early in the contract.
Oh, that is too bad, actually. But it does kind of go to show what we had said last year, and that he was being bailed out by all of these fantastic players. And I think, which is
weird because like I think Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas are like good, and they've got Cortland Sutton, who's a really exciting kind of rookie receiver, but they're just not Thielen or Diggs.
It does lead you to wonder what they'd be able to do with Thielen and Diggs this year, or if it would have been just the situation where, he turned into a pumpkin.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's never going to be answered, but like it's interesting to think about.
All right, let's go to the mailbag, and we got a couple of great questions.
Oh, we didn't talk about Teddy?
Well, Teddy's still a sore subject. Teddy is still holding a clipboard in New Orleans, and
they have confirmed that he is the second quarterback, despite all of Taysom Hill's heroics, I guess.
It never made sense why he ended up going to New Orleans, and I'll tell you why. They have spent the last 2 seasons talking about Hill and how great he is. They toss him out there on special teams and are like, look, he's the backup quarterback, and he's also this punt gunner. Like, they're
also, we're gonna like run him into walls. Yeah. He's great.
He's fantastic. Have you seen this guy? We can literally shoot him out of a cannon during halftime. It's great. He doesn't care. Look, there he goes. They have spent the last 2 years talking about how wonderful he is. Meanwhile, they like how he's the heir apparent to Drew Brees. Meanwhile, they are signing Bridgewater for backup. Like they like him. He's practically a mascot at this point. He might actually be the mascot at this point when he's not out there for special teams doing whatever. But it just never made any sense to me. They love Hill so much.
Here's the thing. I don't think they love Hill as a quarterback.
They just love him as the everyman.
Right. Because I think if he was like a backup quarterback, like, can you imagine a situation where, Taysom Hill like tears an Achilles, like just gunning a punch or whatever, and then Drew Brees goes down and you really need your backup quarterback? Like, what crap? Like, I don't think they ever expect Hill to be the quarterback of the future. I think they're just really excited about his athleticism. So I think that's why they got Bridgewater. The biggest problem, of course, is that Bridgewater's in a 1-year contract. They've confirmed. Sean Payton has said Bridgewater is absolutely the Saints' top backup quarterback. So they really like him. I don't think Hill is real, like as a quarterback option.
I was like, you don't think Hill is real, like as a person?
I did also tweet, Lamau, how is Taysom Hill even real? So fair. Yeah, there are questions about whether or not he's a real person coming from me. But for the most part, not a quarterback.
Makes sense, I suppose. All right, let's go to the mailbag. Our first question is from our guest last episode, Blake Murphy, who asks, can we trade for your offensive coordinator?
No, he's the head coach of the future. I'm not really sure, but they like him. You can't have him.
Have your own terrible offensive coordinator. Let's go with Luke Braun, who asks, is Brian O'Neill like good or just good for a rookie? Feels like he's playing well, but are we still having this feeling that he's due to crater just like everyone thought pre-draft?
A bit of both. Like, I think it's in between, right? Like, I think it's more than he's just good for a rookie, but I don't think he's like good. He's very good for a rookie. How about that? He's very good for a rookie. We did see some of his mistakes in pass protection. He allowed a couple of pressures, I think 2, which is not awful or anything like that. If you have a guy who only allows 8 pressures all season, you're probably in a really good spot for a rookie. And just generally, like, that's almost better than average, I think, for a tackle. Yeah. So that's good. But I think that also it helps that you're up against a team that doesn't have a bunch of edge pass rush ability, especially because Chandler Jones was on the other side of the line. I think that his issues with bull rushes are a problem. And if in another game you're up against a team that does have good bull rushers that can attack the edge, say against the Jets, you could be in a bit of a situation. So he does have problems that could cause some serious concerns for the Vikings, who want him to spend a lot of time adding weight, which is really difficult if you're playing a lot during the season. So, because a lot of players, most players lose weight throughout the NFL season. I mean, Jared Allen always finishes the season 30 pounds lighter than when he started. That's that's going to be difficult, and that's a problem that he has because he needs to anchor against those bull rushes, and he just didn't have to do that much. So, yeah, there's definitely sustainability concerns about his ability to kind of keep that spot going forward. I still think he's better than Rashad Hill at right tackle. And so if you're just not going to put Mike Remmers at right tackle, if you're just not going to do it, so it just reminds me of the SNL impression of George H.W. Bush, not going to do it. I'm actually not old enough to have watched those. It's just, the reruns.
You're just old at heart. You're just very, very, hey, it wears on your face well.
Yeah, thank you. When the Viking Stadium was playing AC/DC, I was like, oh yeah, they're playing good music now. I was like, oh, I'm old. Again, I was not a teenager when AC/DC was coming out, but so I'm old at heart. Great, cool. Vote for the future of the Republican Party, George H.W. Bush. But yeah, I don't think that if they're just not going to move Mike Remmers to tackle, I do think that they're going to put Brown and Neal there, but I don't think that they should if they are willing to move Mike Remmers to right tackle. I still think in my ideal world, it's Mike Remmers at right tackle, so you don't have to worry about the bull rush problem, and then some solution at right guard. Maybe it's Brett Jones. Again, I don't know if Brett Jones's problems as a run blocker at center will translate or won't translate to right guard, because again, I think he has a problem kind of setting himself after the snap. I've talked about that like 80 times, but yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, I think O'Neal had a really good performance. I think it's quite good for a rookie. I do think that he has demonstrated, even currently this year in the NFL, that he's got some issues against players who have power.
1,000 points of light right there, folks. Next question is from Pocket9Z, who asks, do the Vikings rework Thielen's contract for next year? I think you kind of have to at this point.
Yeah.
There's
I don't think anyone would be like, Thielen's not a team player if he decides to hold out too. So yeah, and it's going to create a problem for the Vikings because they've got some contracts that they want to evaluate and potentially resign. I mean, you've got Wayne's option. Maybe you want to extend him before the option kicks in, which is super expensive. Obviously, Anthony Barr, everyone's talking about that. Sheldon Richardson, certainly a possibility. He had another great game. He's, I want to say, 4th or 5th in the league among interior defenders and total pressures. That's pretty cool. So, a bunch of really difficult stuff coming up for the Vikings.
Yeah. Next question is from Ian, who asks a purple Buckeye sort of thing. He says, hey, John from St. Cloud here. Why does Arif constantly hate on Ben Gideon when he consistently puts up great PFF numbers? I don't mean to compare, but he's obviously the next Derek Brooks. Thanks, I'll hang up and listen.
This is very good. Very good impression.
That was good, actually. Yeah. You need a more obscure Minnesota town name. Like
Wapaton or something like that?
Wapaton. No. Wapaton's in North Dakota. Breckenridge is in Minnesota. You could have gone with Breckenridge, though.
I just chose Wapaton because it's an example of this, but fine. Okay, fine. Yeah, it's not in Minnesota or Reef.
I just wanted to be technically correct, the best kind of correct.
Yeah, be pedantic. I wasn't saying it was in Minnesota. Anyway. Austin, Minnesota is too big for this bit, right? Which is crazy.
Yeah. What's the name of the town from that the Owl City guy was from? It's not Oswego. It's damn it, it's not funny anymore. All right, never mind.
I already forgot. Oh yeah, Ben Gideon. Did he play? No, he definitely played. I've tweeted a couple of times about how many snaps he was taking.
You hate him so much you can't remember if he played.
Yeah. So Ben Gideon got way more snaps in this game than he got the last game. So the last game, he got 5 snaps. In this game, he got 10. So, cool. He ends up with a pretty good PFF grade in this game, too. I don't know what his PFF 2.0 grade is, but I do know that his 1.0 grade is really high for a guy who took 10 snaps. And he had 1 tackle assist, not even a solo tackle, just a tackle assist. It's cool. They clearly think of Eric Wilson played 3 snaps. Like it's very close. Cool. He's playing well in the snaps that he's in on. They don't want him to be in on that many snaps.
No. Next question is from Damian Barrett, who says, every show James mentions his, quote, then girlfriend at least 7 times. Is this the same person or are they generally different girls? Can this be attributed to a Trubisky-esque inability to swipe left on dating apps? That's clever. How's it working out for you? Being clever.
Wow, you took that personally, man. A personal question set you off for something.
I'm triggered now. I had actually mentioned briefly on Twitter to Damian Barrett that the girl from the IKEA story is not the same as the one from the sledding one, who is not the same as the mortician that I am currently dating. So no, they are They are not the same person. And I have plenty of stories that I cannot tell online, but I will be telling when we go to Bar None in New York City, October 18th, Thursday, October 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We will be recording the portion of the show that is not full of potentially like lawsuit material. And then afterwards, I will be telling all sorts of terrible stories. So there is
that's really fantastic. Your ability to slide a plug in, I think today, it's a very Ben Gideon thing, right? Where you don't take that many opportunities, but the couple opportunities you did, especially in this game, in this pod, incredible. Yeah. 98, great. 98.
I do what I can for the community, and I've always said that. Seth, last couple of years anyway. Seth Martin asks, curious for your take on these ACL injuries. Is this a function of playing on turf, or is a 27-yard line at the bank simply cursed?
So you asked this on Twitter, and then somebody responded to it, I think to this question or just in general, with like pictures as if I had not already seen this conspiracy, which is like fair because like what a weird conspiracy. But I was aware, it was brought to my attention that both rookies tore their ACL on the 27-yard line. Okay. Like it's some people are taking this I'm not saying that you, the question asker, are taking this seriously, but there are some people that are, which is pretty funny because like no other Vikings have like torn their ACL on the 27-yard line in the past years, just like those two. Or if they have, it's not been brought to anyone's attention. So like, is it magic and only affects rookies? Like, does it know how many snaps they've played in the NFL? If so, figure out someone who can do magic to reverse it. Also help you cheat because like you've got them. Why not, cheat? I don't think there's a thing. I mean, every team, I think there's an ACL tracker on Reddit. And I'm pretty sure every team is on there right now. So every team suffered ACL problems. So some teams suffering like 2 or 3 is like, yep.
Well, I mean, not every team is the Chargers, quite frankly.
That's true. Yeah. That's a serious question. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. that's the real question. Who did you piss? Okay. You don't have to ask who they pissed off, but like.
Also, I want to say the 27-yard line curse is great because J-Ron Curse wears 27. It's fantastic.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Creepy. Next question. Brian Jellerson asks, is Kirk bad at home? I feel like his best games so far have been on the road, or is it just still too early to tell?
I think historically he's pretty good at home, in Washington anyway. So, yeah, it's truly to tell. I also think that like most of the time we find the instances of a player being better on the road than at home. Like I think when Jay Cutler was playing for Miami, or Jay Cutler at some point in his career, because of course this would happen to him. When you find a player who's like better on the road than at home, they tend to regress back to being better at home. It's just like a thing. Like the people are just generally better at home. And if you're not, you will be. So don't worry about it.
Yeah. Let's go to the final question, which is very important to ask. Esteban asks, is it still okay to like Kirk Cousins after that touchdown celebration?
Well, remember, he was fine. He was doing the Bernie because that was his interpretation of the dead arm dance. And that is in my list of approved touchdown dances, which I just made up right now. And that is the only thing that is currently on the list. But yeah, he's fine. So you don't even have to like him less. You just have to, give the side eye to Thielen.
There you go. At least we know who to blame. So that is going to be it for this episode. We will be coming back later this week from Bar None, Thursday, October 18th. I'm just trying at this point. Bar None, Thursday, October 18th.
I shouldn't have pointed it out.
At 9 p.m. We will be doing our live taping there, answering questions and giving out some free stuff there. So you can check us out there. We will be posting the episode shortly after we record it. So we will have that up either late Thursday night or early Friday morning, depending on the Wi-Fi situation. So that is going to be it for the episode. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So at The Athletic, I'll be breaking down the top plays, both positive and negative for the Vikings against the Cardinals. Then I've also got a story about Danielle Hunter coming up soon. I talked to a defensive line expert about that, so I'm pretty excited about what he has to say about Danielle Hunter's development, and I hope that you will be too. And then, of course, if I have enough time before we leave for New York, a New York Jets preview.
Excellent. So that is going to be it for us. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to tweet that, even if it is a work in progress. And we will see you later this week from New York. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.